everybody. Oh, everybody's just on one side of the room. Is there any reason why you don't spread out to the other side? Who's on the other side there? It doesn't matter where the camera is. You sit comfortably. So, what do you guys want to talk about? I think you guys been talking about the kingdom, right? Isn't that why we're all here?
That's right.
So what have you learned about the kingdom? Why is it beautiful? What's so beautiful about God's kingdom? What does that mean?
The government doesn't.
Yeah? The kingdom is a free place. I mean, if you look at what is the basis of God's kingdom, what does Father say God's kingdom is? Yeah, by conscience. If you're going to be living by conscience, does that mean you have free will or not? To have conscience means you have the ability to choose, right? You can determine what you believe is right and wrong based on your moral understanding of relationships and situations, right? So, there's an element of freedom, of free will. How about love? Can love exist without free will? Why? Can't you just force somebody to love you? You can't? So, in God's kingdom, it's a kingdom of conscience and free will. And with free will, if you have free will, does that guarantee you that you have love? But you have the possibility of getting love, right? So it's not fair. Doesn't that mean God's kingdom's not fair because some people get love and other people don't? It's a mean God, isn't it? No? So in God's kingdom, you got to actually get out and do something. Nothing's going to be given to you. How about if you're hungry? What do you got to do? Get a business? What happens if you're not smart enough to make a business? Yeah. Well, I think one of the founding fathers said it best. I mean, there's no better motivator to motivate you to work hard than hunger. I guess if you're hungry enough, you'll figure out what to do to make a living. But those are very good and important questions. So when we think about God's kingdom, we're seeing that God's kingdom requires elements of it, free will, free choice. You have to take initiative. Things aren't guaranteed, they're risky. Things are risky. Things aren't guaranteed for you. You might not get love. You might not get food. Is that the kind of place which you want to live in?
Yes.
Why?
Because you're trusting God.
So, if we look at those elements, then we see that the basis in which the kingdom of God, which we're talking about, is very much anchored in non-coercion and in your own personal choice. And that's the philosophical basis on which the kingdom is built. And so when we look at the Constitution, that's the difference between, that's the basis in which the Chanaguk Constitution is built on, is the freedom to choose, to have conscience, to have free will, to be able to create your own life, to be able to pursue happiness. But there is no guarantee of success. There's no guarantee of economic success. There's no guarantee of emotional success. But there is the possibility of success and of finding love and of finding fulfillment in your life as God planned for you. But when we look at, we've talked a lot about God's kingdom in that regard, especially if you discuss the Constitution class. So then when we look on the other side, what is Satan's kingdom? What is the philosophic basis of Satan's kingdom? Well, yeah. What is the opposite of choice?
No choice.
It's force, right? So basically, Satan's kingdom is basically, if he has something more than I do, then we should get together and steal it from him. That's what socialism is, right? That's what socialism is, right? Correct? If they're in a society, different people have different amounts of social resources and different amounts of money. So you say it's not fair, and you get enough people to get together to say it's not fair, and what do the group of people who say it's not fair do? They steal it. And if the people don't want to give up their resources, how do they steal it?
Of course.
What do? They kill people, they beat them up one way or another, they take what they did not produce. So that's the basis of socialism. That's the basis of Satan's kingdom. It's envy, jealousy. He has more than me, so I should take some of his. So what do you think about the moral underpinning of that kind of society? Does it seem just? So you're saying that the notion of egalitarianism is unjust.
Bingo.
It's evil?
Inequality. Inequality of opportunity is, equality of opportunity is good, but outcome isn't always guaranteed.
Sure. That's the whole point. If you have equal opportunity, then you're guaranteed that the outcome will be unequal. Because people have different abilities and different talents. Yeah, everybody is unique. And even if you had forced equal economic results, then people are still unequal. Because people are going to be unequal in terms of happiness. Some people are going to be much more joyful than other people. Some people are going to be with the people they love, and the other people are going to be miserable. So if you create equality in economic results, and now you have inequality in happiness, how is that equality in results? So that's the problem we get into when you talk about Satan's kingdom or Satan's idea or socialism or communism, is that the complaining, the saying that I'm a victim, it's not fair to me. This psychology never ends, even if you make economic results the same. There will always be constant jealousy. Because your focus is not in improving yourself, not in working on yourself, not in seeing who you are as an individual. But your focus is on comparing yourself to other people.
So they are the losers.
Yeah, you're just basically being jealous of other people rather than going out and making your own life. And you're creating your own identity and your own misery. And ultimately, what is that? What is that egocentric focus? It's idol worship, right? So the basis of socialism is idol worship. You're worshiping your self-victimization. That brings us right back to the Ten Commandments. That's why God warns us away from worshiping idols. Because it never ends. You know, there are societies and societies boil down to fundamental philosophic principles. Very simple precepts are the foundation of the society, the nation, and the world. It's, when you look at the world, you say it's big and it seems huge and there's lots of complexity in it. But the complexity doesn't make the world. The underlying fundamental simple philosophic principle is the basis in which the entire society is built. And so there's a fundamental difference between a society built on free will and a society built on coercion. Now, these are two fundamentally mutually exclusive principles. They do not mix together well. It's like oil and water. So if you want to pursue a society of equal results or social or use of force to make the results more equal, then you're going to be continuously separating yourself from the notion of free will. And as the institutions which progress in creating that force continue to grow, those institutions will continue to abuse their power and expand their abuse of power. And then you get down this very slippery slope which you can't turn around on. So when we look at the Garden of Eden and the story of the fall of Adam and Eve, we see how innocently Eve fell into eating the apple. But once she went down that path, it just became a slippery slope, and generation after generation, the consequences of her action multiplied infinitely until this entire world of Satan's kingdom was created. So that's the point. The point is where you start is the most important. What is the basis in which your society or your kingdom is built? What is the seed from which, let's say, the tree that you plant comes from? Is it a good seed or is it a bad seed? And it's those fundamental, simple moral precepts which basically will determine the fate of the entire world and how the world will turn out. And so that really is the question of the choice that you're making. And that's the question of the choice that the entire unification community had to make after Father ascended. What type of kingdom are we pursuing? What is the vision for God's kingdom? That's why choice is important. It really matters what you choose. It's not always the same. This world which you see around us, which we've come to enjoy, based upon the Christian precept, which was developed through Western civilization, and which the founding fathers of this nation fought for through the Revolutionary War to establish. This is not this society is not a society which is necessarily guaranteed just by mutual interaction of people. It's actually a historical anomaly. Most of human history is not like this. And free societies don't last very long. And that's the really sad thing about it, is that when our ancestors, had to work all throughout biblical history to establish the United States of America with the Constitution, the idea of freedom and liberty and self-determination, all those millions and millions of people who shed their lives and who died to build this nation. And the people who inherit that nation, they enjoy the fruits of that nation, of that labor and of that sacrifice. But they don't value what they've been given or inherited. And that's really the big problem that we face from generation to generation. How do you educate your children to value what they've received for free? Well, that's my choice. I chose to support freedom rather than tyranny.
How do you get your children to appreciate growing up in a nice house? So much. How can most rich families lose all their money within like 3 generations?
They do.
So what are you doing to keep your descendants humble and hardworking and productive?
That's really the test and the challenge, is the transfer of that understanding how to maintain and the value of what you receive from your father from generation to generation. And that's really what didn't happen after God created the world and through Adam and Eve, basically. Adam and Eve didn't understand the value of the inheritance which they were given by God, and they basically squandered it and gave it to their servant. But the servant has been able to transfer his lineage from generation to generation. And that's why when we look from the biblical sense, when we look at first the blessing of Israel, which was given to Abraham, Abraham was really the model in which the father was able to transfer his understanding and the value of the blessing which he received from the Creator to his son, and then to his son. And it was that transfer of the blessing from one generation to the next 2 generations which was able to create the victory in Abraham's family and to secure the blessing of the nation of Israel. So that's the challenge which we have when we are called to establish our families, is not only to create a ideal relationship between husband and wife, but to create a relationship between husband and wife which transfers that value, that lineage, that teaching from the parents to the children. Abraham is victorious through Isaac and Jacob. And so God sees those 3 generations as one. Because it's the intergenerational transfer of authority and responsibility which has to occur for that authority to continue on the earth throughout time. If that doesn't occur, then there's a break and the lineage ends. And so that's the difference between you being an individual, a righteous individual, an individual with individual truth and love for God, and that of being a king in the nation of Kook. Because when you think about sovereignty, sovereignty is not just your personal free will. Sovereignty is is the lineage which you're able to transfer from your generation to the next generation. So now the king is calling you to put on your crowns. That means you have to think about how you're going to transfer the blessings that God gives you and the gifts that God gives you to, not only for your own personal consumption, but how you're going to transfer that to your next generation. So it's not just me. It's all of you, if you want to be kings in God's kingdom, to think about inheritance.
You were talking about freedom, but somehow they don't see the value.
Please use the
So how to
microphone.
educate our children
Please
to
use
see
the
value. I was thinking about what you said about freedom and transferring to the next generation. So the question is, I don't know, we have to somehow seem to educate our children to see the value of what we're giving them. Sometimes you give something away for free in the current situation, maybe they don't understand its value if they're not mature enough.
So that means that's the whole point, is how do you get your children to value what you've worked your entire life to build? Well, that means when it comes to your children, you as the king of your lineage has to choose. You have to continue to exercise choice and free will and responsibility when it comes to determining what you're going to do with the money or the resources you've accumulated through your life. Are you going to give it to John or Jay or Jane, or are you going to just negate your responsibility to choose and say, okay, I'm dividing it up equally? That's the difference between families which are developing intergenerational sovereignty versus family which just has sovereignty in one generation and then dissipates over time.
I think you should send the kids, like two fathers sent us, to do home church. Just take away other things, just go somewhere else with nothing. And you figure it
Sure.
out how.
I mean, that's one way to test the kids, but in the end, when you have to pass away, you have to choose.
So I think if you just give all your children everything equally across the board, they may not see the value. That lends into socialism.
Well,
They
that's the
have one
point.
child,
That's the
but they
point.
excel
That's
and
the
see
point.
the value more than the others.
If
and
you
they
as
get
a
what you
father
need.
just decide to say, okay, without any other valuation of characteristics of your children, say, I'm going to give just equally and that's it, because it's the easiest way to do it, you've basically taken away your personal choice to determine who is most qualified in your lineage. You see now the uncomfortable position which you're put in? This is the difference between sovereignty and no sovereignty, between being a king and being a servant or a slave. It's choice, difficult choices. And that's the difference. That's the difficulty. Not only do you not only do you have to make choices throughout your entire life to build up your family or your estate or whatever, you're going to have to continue to make those choices as to how that will be distributed to your children, how you're going to evaluate your children, and how you're going to judge your children. How you judge and measure their virtue. So it's easy to talk about responsibility. It's easy to talk about sovereignty. It's easy to talk about being a king in God's kingdom. But to actually take on the responsibility of fulfilling that role, that's more challenging. So now when we look at the fallen world, we know which way the laws are trying to push people into. Basically, the way the laws are set up, you know, the country or like even the United States encourages strongly to basically divide up your inheritance and not give it to one child and to basically, you know, consume everything you've made before you die through your retirement. So that's socially how things are being engineered as a society for 99.99% of the people. And why is that? Is that because that was the principle of egalitarianism or equal opportunity or opportunity of for all people in the nation? No. Those laws were put in place later because basically there's a group of people who don't want you to be kings, don't want you to have a family lineage. They want to dissipate intergenerational wealth. Because in the current system of laws in this society, even in America, there are, for the people who are truly wealthy, there are all sorts of loopholes where you can basically transfer all your wealth to one person without basically taxation if you do the proper estate planning. So basically, the way the system is designed right now, it's basically most people are not going to be able to take advantage of intergenerational inheritance of resources. So the majority of people cannot participate and be a part of the kingship of God's nation. There's only a very few people who have the resources to have the legal, to hire the lawyers necessary to be able to partake in transferring resources from one generation to another. That allows few families to exercise more control over the people of the world. And so fundamentally, those laws which make it difficult for the regular person to decide and choose an inheritor or a successor, it hurts most of the families in the world. It doesn't help them. It doesn't make a better society. So when we as a community, when you think about creating God's kingdom, these are the issues which you have to think about and address. How do we actually change the laws so that regular middle-class people can go from being wage slaves to becoming actual sovereigns? If you can't inherit wealth intergenerationally, you are not a sovereign. Well, there's death tax. There's also all sorts of other laws, gift taxes. Anytime you want to gift something, you have to pay taxes on it. So there's many areas where people the government takes the money out before you can pass it to your kids. But basically, if you understand trust law or estate planning, then basically you can get around all those taxes if you plan ahead. What's that? Sure.
It seems to me as we transfer intergenerational wealth from one generation to the next, I think we have a big lesson that it's not always, society says, oh, give it to the eldest, because that's like a fixed amount, but we have learned that's not always the case. By individual sovereignty, we have learned we have to choose the one who's most qualified to take care of all the family in that intergenerational transfer. Seems to me that's transferring the whole value of sovereignty from the right person in one generation to the right person in the next generation.
Well, that's your responsibility to choose wisely. You don't necessarily have to transfer everything to one person. I mean, if you have a number of kids and they're able to work together, mutual cooperation, not just individual wealth, but they have a business and are able to distribute shares to them in a certain percentage, and they're able to continue through their cooperation. Then there's merit in each child, but you're going to have to determine what that merit is. And that's a difficult thing for parents to do, is to look at their children and say, yeah, this kid is better than the other kid, and so I'm going to give this kid more. But that's the reality too. Each of your children are given different gifts. And so for your family and your lineage, you'll have to think about what exactly do you want to do with your sovereignty. How do you want your sovereignty to develop over time, from generation to generation? I mean, the gifts you're inheriting are not always going to be money. I mean, for a father, it was the blessing of true parents. The blessing of giving the blessing, which was the real inheritance. But there's always that element. Which of your children understands and values what you're giving them? And you see, this is the challenge, which this is why God's kingdom has been lost. Because these difficult choices, parents just think about, I don't want to make this choice, it's too difficult. Let's just not make the choice and just divide it up equally. But deciding to do that is also making a choice. Either way, you're making a choice. You can choose to create your lineage, your sovereignty, a certain way, or to destroy the sovereignty of your children in a certain way. Now, people here who are not parents, who are the children, when they hear this and they think about it, they say, oh, so unfair. And what is that comment, so unfair? What is that? That is the underlying foundation of what? Satan's kingdom. When your kids say, oh, that is so unfair, they're basically saying, I want to use force to destroy what you're doing, because I think I should get some. Right?
Yeah.
Which is the basis of socialism. If you don't give it to me, I'm going to take it, whether you like it or not. So, in that case, when one of your kids say that, what do you have to say? It's very clear what the sovereign has to say. No, you're not. And if you try to take it by force, I'm gonna whack you. I can defend myself. I can defend my castle. And that's why you have to be strong as a sovereign. You have to have the means and the will to defend your kingdom. And so that brings us into when we start with the free will, when we start with free speech, when we start with freedom of religion, if we have those freedoms, if you're a sovereign, automatically the freedoms go to the next requirement, which is if you got freedom and you're building your wealth and you're keeping the stuff that you make, then you have to be able to keep others from taking it from you, which is the freedom of self-defense. So you see, these things are not independent of each other. These natural rights, which men and women have looked at over the centuries and have said these are the gifts from God, are not something which is just made up out of thin air because it sounds good or because we want to have guns. These rights are required to have as an entire package, because without the other rights, you're not going to keep the basic right of conscience. Mm-hmm. Free will. The ability to choose. But it's not just the ability to choose, it's the responsibility to choose.
So that's why you say when we talk about letting the state defend us like police and things like that, that's actually really a principle.
Well, when you let the state defend you, basically you're opening the door for the state to now take away your freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience.
So that's the whole security, freedom.
And your stuff, because once the state defends you, you don't have the means to protect your stuff from other people. Because now the state can come in and say, I want your stuff. And what can you say to the state? You can't say anything, because you have no means to defend yourself. That is a revolutionary principle. And that principle is basically what we're talking about as the biblical economics. The economics of Jesus Christ. The economics of even the Lord of Second Advent. And that economic principle was very clearly presented. I get to keep the stuff that comes from my own labor. That's what it means. I work for it, I make it, I get to keep it. And that's the problem. If I'm very productive and I make a lot of stuff and I accumulate a lot of stuff, I'm going to have a lot more than everybody else. Then the people who are lazy bums are going to come to my house and say, I'm going to take some of your stuff because you got so much and I don't. And if you don't have a gun, they'll take it. So when you look at biblical principles of the right to work, the right to keep the fruits of your labor, it's a biblical principle actually to have the right to defend your labor and your work and your person. Which means it's a biblical principle that you have the right to kill. I'm not making this stuff up, it's all related to each other.
You also have a right to distribute it as you see fit.
Yeah, your inheritance, you have to decide how you're going to give it to your kids. And so that's going to be the challenge. You may have been very successful in your life in accumulating wealth or whatever, whether it's spiritual wealth or physical wealth. But if you're not successful in transferring it to the next generation, your work's going to disappear. Well, just look at Father. He has a lot of spiritual wealth. All the people who loved him followed him throughout all the his entire ministry. So his wealth wasn't just physical, it was basically the love of people, the reputation. And a lot of people in public office have that kind of wealth. Like, if you look at the politicians, they have their name value. And so their kids who run for their office are running on the political wealth of their parents. Mm-hmm. But that's the thing. The kingdom of God is a kingdom of sovereigns. So not only political dynasties, but economic dynasties. And that's the problem. We should have lots of middle-class dynasties. But we don't because of the way the laws are structured right now in the country. And so when we talk about God's kingdom, we're talking about the greatest amount of sovereignty for the greatest number of people. And basically, that nation can be constructed based upon, the fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution, but also by the reflection of how the laws are played out on the books. If the Constitution and the practice of lawmaking in a nation is able to be pursued in a manner in which large concentrations are prevented, then you're going to have a society with a very wide distribution of middle class. And then if you're able to create a society in which you're able to inherit the wealth the middle class makes to the next generation, then you're going to have what you call an intergenerational middle class. A relatively broad intergenerational middle class. And that is what we're talking about when we're talking about the kingdom of heaven on earth. We're talking about a kingdom and a nation in which you have these rights of inheritance, not just for, the few aristocratic families like you have in this world, but for like 30% of the population. Well, in any type of society, the owners, if you're able to remove all the impediments to competition and to remove all the regulations and the bureaucracies, then the most, at any time, the most amount of owners for businesses and resources in that nation will probably be about 30% of the population. Will be able to be some kind of business owner, from small to mid-sized, large business. Because you're going to have people growing up who are not yet qualified to be in the workforce, people leaving the workforce, people retiring. So the 30% is about the largest you can get. And so the real spectrum in the country between ownership and dictatorship is going to be between one person owning all the resources of that country up to about 30% of it, people being some kind of business owner. And so what we're trying to do when we talk about God's kingdom from a practical sense, when we talk about creating God's kingdom, is we're talking about how do we structure the laws so that we get the maximum number of business owners in a nation. And that's what the Constitution of Kook is designed or sketched around producing. Trump is definitely moving in that kind of direction. But, as we study the Constitution of Kook and as we discuss God's kingdom is not just something which is an idea, which is far away, which has just been the dream of all those crazy religious fanatics throughout history. No, God's kingdom can be constructed through our understanding, not of law, politics, economics, society structures. It is a real and practical kingdom that can actually be constructed. And it is a kingdom in which we can actually build a model of and forecast how that will affect the people in that society. It is not a kingdom which is illusory or far away or idealistic or something which is unattainable. It is completely attainable to us today if we have the will to construct it. And that's the important point to understand. That's the important distinction that we need to make.
It is also said that the kingdom of God is in your heart, right?
Yes, the kingdom of God is already here. We just need to make it.
It just takes wholeness and integrity of a person.
Well, the kingdom of God has always been very simple. The precept of the kingdom of God is what Father talked about. It's conscience. It's free will. Free will in pursuit of happiness. And what is happiness? It's to be in love. With who? With your Creator.
With your Creator.
But those simple words and those simple concepts actually have a fundamental and profound ramification on how the society is constructed. If we follow the principles of free will and of conscience and of sovereignty and of inheritance, then that creates a very distinct society. In terms of all aspects of the society, its economic structure, its legal structure, its political structure, its military structure, its coercive structure. And so this is a transition that we need to start thinking about. How do we move our community from being a very isolated, highly devoted community, religious community, to becoming an actual nation, a nation of God's idea? Well, that's the question. It's how you build it. That's what we need to think about.
Would the first floor of that be kind of what we're doing now, or the education of the next generation?
Well, there has to be a transition in the way we think a little bit. Because, you know, as a religious community which had to go into the wilderness after Christianity rejected Father, you had to basically be like an army, special forces. But when the rules which you have of, let's say, being an elite force in an army are going to be very rigid, and the standards to become part of that elite force is going to be very high. But then when you look at the standards and the requirements for the regular army, what are it? It's lower. Not as hard, but it's still rigid for an army. But now let's take that society. Well, you're going from the special forces to the regular army, but now let's go to civilian. Are you going to have the same rules for your civilian population as you do for your army? Are the standards going to be lower or higher? So now we have to think about how we can live in a society where we're creating laws and governance and applying our understanding of God's will to a civilian population.
It's been asked a number of times before. Right now, as we presently are. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'll talk loud.
Pass the mic down.
I turned it off.
Okay. Oh, good. It's been asked before when we started speaking about this,
how does it become the logistical reality for us as a small community? What do we do interrelationally that we start building those foundational building blocks for a kingdom of heaven on earth? And I know one of the things you mentioned was learn to hunt and fish, and also learn to farm and become self-reliant.
Well, we're talking about those things now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Because we're talking not only of being self-reliant, and self-reliance, whether it's hunting or fishing or procuring resources for your own family, that's basically keeping the fruits of your labor. But we've been talking about how you're going to inherit that accumulated wealth when you go to the next life. And that's really the big challenge of a sovereign or a king, is how you pass on your work, your life, to your next generation. And so your work and your life are not necessarily just the material things you accumulate. Your work and your life are your pursuit of God's kingdom too, in one regard. So the question is not only in terms of among my kids who is going to be most qualified to receive and manage assets or resources, but who in my children are going to be the best to carry on my vision for God's kingdom. So those are the questions of inheritance, which are now your responsibility. And that's really the test of a community, is whether you can pass on your values and your dreams and your aspirations to the next generation that comes. It's not to do work necessarily just in your generation, but how do you pass that same aspiration to your children? That's the real test of a community. And only a community of sovereigns who's able to practice their belief and pursue their dreams beyond a single generation, only those types of people are going to be able to make truly the nation of God or the kingdom of God. So that's the real test and the real challenge for this community, if we want to be the community which creates God's kingdom on earth. What's up, John?
In the book of Revelations, it says that there will be no more sorrow, no more suffering, no more death. And does that presuppose that in the future everyone will choose the way of goodness?
Well, I think that's basically saying in general, overall, that's true in God's kingdom. Overall, in most instances, people will be quite happy, like 95%, 99% of the people. But you're always going to have like 1% or even 2 or 3% who are psychotic, and they're not going to be very happy. The society's not going to be happy unless they execute those people. So I think that's a statement which is basically talking about the overall good in the society, the overall happiness index. Okay?
Okay?
Anything else? Go ahead, Gideon.
As a libertarian, I have this burning desire to ask this question. It's been lingering on my mind for about an hour. It seems really irrational because it goes against my beliefs, but I don't know why. I just feel like I need to ask you. What's your idea on universal basic income?
Universal basic income, that was actually, Milton Friedman introduced that concept. through basically a negative income tax. And so when you talk about from the economic perspective, a negative income tax, that if your income falls below a certain degree, basically then the government just gives you an income. That's basically what his argument was. Basically, from the economic perspective, just doing a negative transfer is actually the least, causes the least amount of distortion in the economy. But my opinion on the negative income tax is, I mean, in this society where you have to have a transition from big statist organizations to what we want to see, which is a more decentralized society where charity is done at the local level by individuals, you're probably going to have some kind of transitory programs in between what we have today and where we want to get to. And so in that regard, the negative income tax may be something which people may agree to do as a transitory step. But I don't think that's really an ultimate solution. Because the problem is when you look to creating transfers of income by using the state, then basically you're legitimizing the use of coercive force to take those resources. And so the philosophic basis of that nation is no longer secure. It has become corrupted. That means once the basis of that society is corrupted, there's no guarantee that that society will stay in the state of freedom. When you go down the slippery slope of coercion, where you're accepting the use of coercion, then basically it's not hard to move the society in the direction of more coercion. And that's the problem with starting that argument, is once you go down that slope, you've already lost the argument for freedom and liberty. And, I think a good example of that is basically how the gun rights movement in America pursued the issue of gun rights. Basically, their position was very clear: don't give 1 inch, not one damn inch. You resist every compromise to any smallest compromise in the right to bear arms, and every opportunity you get, you push for more gun freedom. So, I think, people may say that negative income tax is something which is better than what we have now, which may be true, but it's not where we want to end up. Because if we have that as a solution, you can go as to less freedom, just as you could try to push it for more freedom. Okay? Anything else? Any other discussions you want to have, John?
I have a lot of optimism over God and Father working through the heir and victorious Cain and Abel. But I find it, I like history a lot. I find there's a lot of skepticism towards the U.S. Constitution from anti-federalists and libertarians. There's a lot of skepticism towards the Constitution from anti-federalists at the time of the convention and libertarians today. Patrick Henry responded to his invitation to the convention he refused it. He said, "I smelt a rat in Philadelphia."
Sure.
And because it was Hamilton and his cronies wanting to free up more mercantilism. So I find it difficult to have faith in the Constitution, and a lot of people feel justified because they feel Lincoln destroyed the American experiment in freedom and ended Jeffersonian principles and murdered the the voluntary union of the free states.
Well, the original Constitution of the United States, it was construed not only as a federal government, but also the great compromise with Jefferson was that it incorporated the Bill of Rights. And it made it very difficult for that government institution to encroach on those rights which were naturally endowed to the people. And so that system of checks and balances was quite a good innovation for a political construct. But the big advantage which you have when you have, let's say, that a type of federal constitution which is very limited in authority, is that you have now access for more people to trade with other people. You're creating a larger population for the free association amongst people in the nation. And just that scale of having more people being able to freely interact and give and take and to buy and sell creates a great deal of prosperity. Now, if you reverse that model and you go back to the basically the system which existed before the Constitution, which was basically Article of Confederation, basically before that was basically 13 autonomous states, you didn't get that benefit of that mutual interaction because states were basically their own sovereign bodies to such an extent that they could basically control the trade in their territory and prevent interstate trade.
The Constitution created more economic freedom.
The Constitution created a larger economic area for people to freely interact for. Now that's the whole point which Father talked about with the UN. Is he said this UN is a problem because it's a Kane type UN. So if on the other hand we had an able type UN, which was construed more like the US Constitution, which guaranteed fundamental human rights based on the principles of natural rights, which is the rights of conscience and the rights of self-defense, then now that kind of international union would actually create a greater sphere, territory, or range for mutual cooperation and mutual prosperity. But that's not what the UN is giving us right now. The UN is giving us one world under Satan, one world of hell, one world under dictatorial control. But if you expanded the original idea of the Constitution to the world level, that's beneficial for all people. So basically all you had to do was basically take the U.S. Constitution and allow all the countries in the world to change their cultures to the point where they could join the U.S. Constitution. Then you would basically have a growth level ideal world at the top of the growth level for the world level. I think the big problem with the American empire is not that we have an American empire, but that the liberties and the principles of America are not expanded to the whole American empire. The principles of America are not extended to all the countries in America's empire.
Well, the empire was built by the Republicans mostly, Lincoln and Roosevelt.
Yeah, I mean, the empire was built supported a lot by the centralized banks and the empires of old. Concentrated power.
Progressives, Roosevelt and then Wilson and then.
Well, even before that, the big banks, international banks, are supported. Basically, what happened after the English Empire collapsed, all the infrastructure and all the people who ran the English Empire were absorbed into the U.S. Empire. So the English Empire, America became the English Empire.
Was that around World War II?
Well, that was after the collapse of that was after, basically World War II, when basically English Empire was finished because the war strained it to such a point where it could no longer fund and finance it. Yeah. But a lot of the intelligence assets and the intelligence agencies and those people were actually integrated and taken into basically the U.S. intelligence services, military services.
As well as the Nazis.
Yeah.
And the Nazis too.
Mm-hmm. The Nazis also.
That's the basis of the CIA.
Yeah, basically OSS and those guys are all from old money from England. The old banking money. Yeah, that was the big problem with the Constitution. The amendment process basically weakened checks and balances, and individual liberties were decayed. The big problem was that, having the senators being voted for by the direct election. Because that was a major check and balance on the federal government, that the state senators were appointed, were decided on how each state would pick it. So a lot of states would appoint their senators from their, by the legislative vote. So actually the state governments had power over their senators. But now, when they changed to the election system for the senators, the state governments lost control of the senators. I think that's the 18th Amendment. Mm-hmm.
I have one question from the Bible.
Yep.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right.
Why are you doing that? I don't want that mic close to me. It's okay.
The Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit in the Bible is always referred to in the masculine gender.
Mm-hmm.
Have been educated that it relates to the mother.
Well, that's the heresy. Because, the principle states very clearly that when we look at God, God is defined primarily by internal nature and external form, which is 형상 and 상상, 상상 and 형상, right? So that's the primary characteristic of God. And the secondary characteristic of God is masculine and feminine, or yin and yang. So when you're looking at the primary characteristics of God, which is internal nature and external form, that's what we refer to as our Father. And so the reflection of masculine characteristics of God and feminine characteristics of God is represented through yin and yang, which is, as we understand it, God the Father and God the Holy Ghost.
Primary and secondary.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. So, is that it? What's up, Gideon?
So, I understand from studying libertarianism that it's not good to have government involved with marriage, and I think we know that when government's involved with marriage, especially in divorce cases, right, men lose half their stuff, whatever. I noticed that in the Chonga Constitution, which I know that Father he actually said in his own words that it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that government advocates for, heterosexual marriages to the point where they could actually get benefits from. And I know for me, when I heard that, it kind of confused me just because of my background of studying libertarianism. Like, if government were to give benefits, doesn't mean that it owns that marriage.
Have you read the Constitution carefully?
I mean, I'll be humble enough to say I don't understand everything.
I mean, what's the primary method where the government gives the marriage benefit?
Right, taxes, yeah.
Which tax?
Well, from what I understand, there's sales tax in the Chonga Constitution.
Well, it's the federal income tax where they used to create the marriage benefit, right?
Oh, we're talking about today in America? Yeah. Oh, right.
So in the Chonga Constitution, is there an income tax?
No.
So how would the government construe benefit for marriage?
So it didn't say that in the Chonga Constitution that it would give benefits.
Yeah, that's exactly the point.
Okay.
So if you read between the lines and you understand how the structure of the Constitution, then that basically answers your question for you.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, so the Constitution, when you read it, you may just be reading the words, but you need to start thinking about how that actually works in practice. And if you read in between the lines, then you can actually figure out what the results will be of those types of rules. So that's the whole point when you make a constitution. When you set up a set of rules, there's going to be intended results, which are apparent, and unintended consequences, which may not be apparent in the written word, but will be the natural cause of the natural result of the structure that you set up.
So when it says benefits, in a way, it's more like it encourages, but it's not going to.
When you refer to benefits, you're talking about material benefits,
Right.
income benefits
Right.
of being married versus being unmarried. Okay, go ahead, Lowell.
I had a question, a little bit different kind of a question, but about our current political environment. A very interesting thing I thought happened with this Montana election just a few days ago,
Yeah.
where the front runner tackled and choked and punched out
Body slam the reporter.
body slammed a negative reporter, yeah. And people were saying that he shouldn't have won the election, but he did win, and that was in Montana. I thought maybe it was a plus for him. But I guess my question is, looking out a little bit farther to the next elections, Donald Trump, of course, won with such a broad base of support and so much unified, the whole country with the vision of getting back to our, making America great again. But we see that the Democrats have just been obstructionary and very nasty about it, and absolutely, against everything that everybody was happy to see him be doing. Do you think that will harm the liberal Democrat Party in the next cycle of elections? Do you think that base will throw out more of them?
I think the Democratic Party is right now is in a death spiral. It's because what's happening is, under Obama, they committed treason. They actively committed treason against the United States of America, and there's just mountains of evidence to that effect. So, for them, if Trump stays in office more than 1 year, that means he's going to start getting effective control of the government. And as he does that, they're all going to jail. So if they don't get him out in the first 6 months, they're all going to be in prison. And now you're actually starting to see some prosecutions happen. So, on Facebook News there was one State Department official who was charged for treason by the Jeff Sessions DOJ. And I would imagine that's going to escalate quite a lot. So, and the other thing which Trump is doing is, of course, he's basically green-lighted the arrest of pedophiles all throughout America and the world. And you know where that's going to lead, because a lot of pedophiles are in Washington. And a lot of pedophiles are in the Democratic Party. So basically, they realize that Trump is coming to get them, literally, round them up and put them in prison and execute them. So they're basically fighting for their lives right now.
Do you think that overlaps into the media as well?
Yeah, a lot of media personalities, I'm sure, are part of that same pedophile cult. Don't leave out the Pope and the Catholic Church. He's going to be deeply insulted. Queen Mother. Don't forget her. I think the more we see coming out, we see that the center of world power is this pedophile network, and it's not just a pedophile network; they're actual practicing Satanists. And that's what we've been talking about. That's what Father's been saying, right? The center of the world, the rulers of the world are Satan. And when, for a lot of regular people, even a lot of BCs, most of our BCs, 80% of them think, hey, America's great. Yeah, there's no Satanism here. And in many ways, America, external prosperity is a fantastic place. But at the root and center of that prosperity, there's still Satan controls it. It's Satan's world. It's not God's world yet. In order for it to become God's world, that center of power has to be changed from pedophiles to people of God. Go ahead, Kyle.
Kind of getting back to the inheritance issue, there was an interesting article just last week in the New York Times where basically they were complaining that the older generation is now hoarding their money and not spending it. And it was very interesting to see their slant. They're trying to build resentment towards those people who are accumulating wealth, and it just seemed like that even in the New York, especially in the New York Times, that they're trying to make an intellectual case for people spending their money and not passing it on, actually.
Well, we know what Satan's all about, right? Satan's all about trying to teach you to hate your kids. All right? Isn't that what Satanism is all about? To harm the young ones? That's what the pedophilia is about. That's what the sex abuse, the murder of kids, the sacrifice of children. No, that's the basis of Satanism, is to hate your kids. And so basically that's the culture they're pushing, is, hey, spend your money on yourself, don't give any to your kids. They don't, they're just spoiled brats and you should hate them anyway. But that's very different than the principle of discerning. And they're saying, yeah, my kids aren't perfect. Some of them have good characteristics, some of them bad, but I'm going to decide to which I believe am most confident that he will carry on my vision for my life and for the vision for my lineage's life. That's very different.
I stand corrected from my wife that wasn't the New York Times, it was the Bloomberg News.
Okay.
Same
thing.
Same thing.
Okay. They're all the same group. We now know the nature of it. I mean, that's a big revelation, is to be able to see Satan's kingdom and to see, Satan's rulers. Even, 3 or 4 years ago, it wasn't apparent. You couldn't see it. It's only after Father ascended that now we're allowed to actually see who is ruling Satan's kingdom, what is at the center of the nations of the world. That's a big revelation. Well, after Father went to the spirit world, it became, yeah. Well, when you look at the world, you don't realize this nature of the extent of evil, because it's been hidden for so long. But it's only the foundation of true Father being in the spirit world and being connected with his descendant here on earth, which creates the spiritual connection, necessary to bring people to the realization of Satan's kingdom.
Our eyes can be open.
Yeah, so our eyes can be open. And that's the thing about Satan's power. He's the magician. He's the illusionist. Once the illusion is broken and you can see the truth, he loses his power. And so that's why the Satanists all around the world are panicking. Because they're exposed. They're out in the open. They're not covered in their illusion. People don't think that they're good anymore. They see them for what they are. Vampires, cannibals, child molesters.
You know, also, this is just, it was not just the, you know, the ascension of Father going to spirit world, but I think all the understandings we have now are because you two left the palace.
Yeah.
And on that foundation, everything could be made.
Well, you know, basically, because we separated from the fallen mother, then we're able to stand up and preserve Father's lineage, Father's heritage, Father's truth. And so that creates the direct dominion of God from one generation to the next. And that's the basis in which we receive our blessings. So now the world is changing. It's fundamentally a different world than it was 3 years ago. And now all the oppressed and angry people from all of history are now seeing who their true oppressors are. And the pitchforks are coming out all over the world. That's why the elites around the world are all panicking. They're terrified. All those pedophile Satanists are terrified. It's kind of like what happened, you know, after the Reformation. What happened after the Reformation? After Martin Luther nailed the 95 Thesis on the wall. You know, there was a 30 years war, of course, but then after that, what did they start doing? People started going up to the castles and doing what? They started burning the witches. Witch burning all over the Protestant world. And the history books like to say, oh, these religious fanatics were really mean, they burned witches, but they were just basically burning all the Satanists. So I think a lot of those witch burnings were proper execution of child molesters, pedophiles, and satanic practitioners. So we should probably bring back some of those laws, like if you're actually killing children in satanic rituals, maybe you should be burned at the stake. I think that would be a good law to have. Maybe pedophiles should be burned at the stake. Or, you know, if you're a cannibal eating children, you should be burned at the stake. Doesn't sound bad to me. Sounds like a very reasonable punishment for the crime. All for witch burning? Light them up.
We got a lot of wood. Save the bullets, burn the witch.
Yeah, you have to really kind of look at history from the viewpoint of people who are writing it. I mean, you've all heard that the Dark Ages were awful and terrible, but now the more we learn about the Dark Ages, the more that we learn that it wasn't actually that dark. There was an awful lot of technology there in the Dark Ages. So. Okay. What's up?
I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts about what could happen around July 2nd.
What could happen around July 2nd? You mean with the Democrats planning their civil unrest? Well, I think it could get quite violent. That's a possibility. If they don't make it violent, then Trump's going to arrest them and execute them all. I think they know what's at stake. What would you do if you're a Democrat who had committed treason against the United States of America? I mean, if you understand what's happening, you can understand why it would get violent very quickly. What's up, Robert?
I heard, and I really have no verification of this, but I heard from somebody that there was a certain group of people in Pennsylvania that had gone to the International Court of Appeals in The Hague and done something towards declaring independence for Pennsylvania. Have you heard anything about that?
No, I haven't. I haven't heard anything about that.
Oh, okay. I guess we'll have to look it up. Never mind.
Okay.
Apparently there's about 10 states altogether that have started doing it since Pennsylvania did it.
Well, you know, the United States of America, even most of Europe, is based on common law. That's the legal theory which our judicial system is based on. And so that common law system actually allows for anybody to assemble a court and a jury. So, you know, you could establish a common law court as citizens. And I think, you know, that's one of the things which we should start studying and learning more about is how we can make our community and our county more consistent and more compliant with the idea of common law and start pushing that forward. Then you can have more, you know, true representative government in the judiciary system. Go ahead, Kyle.
So Rod brought up the issue of July 2nd, and you concurred that, yeah, there could be a lot of disruption. How can we best prepare physically as well as...
Well, that's why we're here in Pennsylvania, right? We've already prepared. We're out of the big cities. No, we're...
September 23rd. Somebody yesterday asked a question to Yonchilin that around the time, everybody can hear me, around the time something happened that the member of the Family Federation, they cannot come back with through father anymore, or there is some kind of line or some kind of
Well, that...
something.
That's what... The king had basically said you had 1 year after a certain date to come back into father's lineage to maintain your blessing status, which you had before you drank the false holy wine.
And there was
But that was the
September-
only limitation. There isn't another.
But September what? With September?
He didn't draw, there's no line drawn on September 23rd.
Oh.
Members of the family fed, if they take choose to come back under father's authority and go through the proper 3-day ceremony, separation and 3-day ceremony, they can join father's lineage again. But they don't maintain the blessing status which they had. They're basically coming in as a church member who had left the church.
Yeah,
and
but my
came back in.
question was, what is the period that kind of was did they have the
Well,
possibility-
you have, as long as you're alive, the opportunity to come back to to father's authority.
So there is not particularly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
If you end up dying before you come back to father's authority, then you're just shit out of luck.
Sorry for you.
Yeah, that's nothing we can do for you there. But that's what we want to leave you with is that we need to be a community, and we are a community that is actually looking towards trying to actually build God's kingdom on earth. Not just from a theoretical perspective, but we want to build it in substance and in practice. And that's what our community here is challenged with. We need to bring it to this community in Pennsylvania and then to all the communities around the world. So step by step, everybody needs to work in that direction. Okay? All right, thank you. Okay. Yeah, we can take a picture.
Take a group picture. You could please come to the front and
Do you want to take a picture going this way?
yeah, we'll just take pictures for you and Janet.
All right. Well, you get set up. I'll bring you back.